your new piece. I was really impressed by the whole concept of Musubi. So I read about it, but can you explain what that is for who doesn't know?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a, esoteric concept because it's even the explanations are not always the same. It's a very airy kind of idea, but the gist of it and the part that really resonates with me is Musubi as being this kind of life force that ties us together. So it speaks to kind of a connectedness between all human beings. And it also is kind of like the Shinto or the Japanese version of fate, where certain people, when they cross paths, it's because they've had this, this connection or this string kind of tying them together. And I just find that very beautiful because it's something that, especially in my musical life, I've witnessed and felt really deeply, is the way that music kind of reveals those connections between people or creates those connections that in other, in daily life you don't see, because it's invisible. And so the concept has always fascinated me. I actually came across it first in the movie Your Name.
Your Name?
Your Name, yeah, Makoto Shinkai's anime. It came out, I don't know, in 2019 or something. It's a really great movie. It's about these two teenagers, one lives in Tokyo in the city and he's a student there. And then there's a girl who lives in a very small mountain town, and they just start swapping bodies randomly one day. And so they wake up in each other's bodies and live each other's lives. And it starts off as this kind of strange, awkward thing, but then they get to know each other very intimately and start by living each other's lives. They begin to develop this relationship and writing about it. And the big twist is they learn that they are not in the same time, that her little town got wiped out by a meteor years ago. At the end, they kind of both are living their lives, and they both have kind of forgotten about this strange thing that happened with all the body swapping. It's almost like a distant dream at this point. And then one day they are walking past each other in public and they finally cross paths, and there's just this sense of familiarity. And so they are about to walk past each other, but then they stop and they're simultaneously what's your name? And so in a way, the way that they meet is almost like when we meet somebody just in life, like a stranger, but sometimes there are those people that you feel like you've known forever, right. And so it's a kind of expression of that, I think, which I really loved. And so in that film, they use this idea of Musubi and this tying together. And that's the concept that basically this old wise grandma uses to tell the boy how to travel back in time, and to use this concept of the threads. And so there's the idea of threads, because the girl in her town is she weaves cords and thread bracelets. And so there's that kind of thematic element too in the film. So it's really good. And that's where I first encountered the idea. And then I just kind of felt it lends itself well to music, and especially with, solo instrument. Whenever I'm writing for a solo instrument, I always feel like it's a great opportunity to just think about line. And thinking about line, the image of threads always kind of comes, or a string, or something that's just singularly moving in some kind of way. And so there's 4 movements. The first movement is called Unravel and Dance. And so it has 2 distinct sections. One is this kind of string-like unraveling, very free melody. And then a contrasting dancing section where the melodic material kind of takes on a more buoyant dancing form, and then back to the lyrical kind of very free rhapsodic melody. The second movement is called Yearn and Touch, and the idea that I was thinking of for this is reaching. So the whole thing is building, using these, whole step gestures to kind of build up to this climactic whole step melody that is kind of like the peak, and so it's just like a gradual climb to that. And then when it gets there, then there's all these kind of free arpeggios going down and then up again, and it's kind of soaring. Mm-hmm. And then the third movement is called Spindle and Loom, and that is that was for me very inspired by the music of Bach, particularly his preludes, his piano preludes. I mean, really on any instrument, but his preludes always have this feeling of being from start to finish just one big cadence, just one gesture. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to kind of create something like that was just constantly moving. So it's challenging for the player because, he has to figure out where to breathe and, all of that. But there are definitely places that he can phrase and sneak in a breath, but it is this kind of perpetually moving arpeggios that are kind of shifting and changing. And then the last movement is Burst. And this is like a very fiery, fun, wild kind of very rhythmic movement. And because in the concept of Musubi, one of the things that it encapsulates is this idea of birth and generation and like a explosion of birth. Like it's just kind of the act of creation, right? And so it starts with like a low trill, like almost in the shallow register, and it starts quiet and then it crescendos and then there's a big kind of glissy gesture goes up to this high rhythmic idea. Right. And that kind of happens throughout. So that's the idea of the piece.
That's fantastic. How did you come up with 4 movements?
I find like having shorter kind of bite-sized movements can be more engaging sometimes than having a longer piece, especially when it's a solo instrument. Mm-hmm. I love longer forms for other, combinations, but because the instrumentation is so bare, I feel like it needs to kind of have, contained in smaller movements. Just it helps to keep the drama moving. And so, yeah, I came up with, I didn't have a fixed idea of how many movements I was going to do. But each one just started with, like a kernel of an idea. Mm-hmm. And then I just kind of worked from there. And I think the last movement, Burst, because of its energy, I figured it was a good place to end. So I just stopped there.
Yes. I love that you said the kernel of the idea that you start with. Is that, what is the most impactful element to you when you start composing that kernel? Is it rhythm? Is it melody? Or is it just like this idea of sound, like timbre? What is it?
Yeah, so that's a good question because it's a combination. It depends. I find that for me it's kind of like almost very evenly split between melodic and rhythmic ideas. Like for the faster movement at the end, that was very much a rhythmic idea. I actually wrote the rhythm first and then added pitch later. But the first movement, I actually came up with the pitch content that I wanted to use, or kind of just like a set of notes that I liked the sound of and intervals, and then kind of almost like a vocal improvisation using those notes and to create that very free-flowing melody. And then sometimes, like the second movement is much more melodic in nature in terms of just being a more structured melody, I would say. And in cases like that, the intervals and the contour of the melody and those kinds of things take precedence. And then in the case of the third movement, because it's all kind of arpeggios, in a way harmony was a key factor in that, thinking more harmonically because it's all kind of broken chords.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so cool. You haven't composed for the solo clarinet, right?
That's right. Yeah,
I remember
haven't.
did saxophone. You did.
Yeah, I did. I did a piece for solo saxophone, and that was for my recital. And it was because I needed to fill 10 minutes on my recital. So it was similar structure. It was 5 miniatures. And, some of the ideas in terms of just the general gestures or feelings that I was going for in that piece, I kind of brought over to this one. But this piece is entirely different, and I think better because that one was very much done in a rush too.
Oh,
so
I see.
I'm excited to work with him too.
Yeah.
He seems that he's very open, and he emailed me. He said it's a very exciting piece, and I was like, oh, thank you. If he thinks it's exciting, and then I hope that's not code for it's really hard and terrible to learn. But I think it's I tried to be very true to the clarinet, as much as I can. I used Stravinsky's 3 pieces for clarinet as a model, but then also using Stravinsky as a model for anything just means it's going to be really hard. So
That's right.
there's some movements are more challenging than others. I would say the last 2 movements are probably the most challenging. The first 2 are probably not too difficult.
Yeah, he's a great player.
I'm really excited to work with him on that aspect of it, of about all of the different things that he can bring, in terms of his interpretation and how he wants to, play certain things, the colors, and, all those things that you don't really know as a composer until you've worked with the performer.
Right.
That's the really exciting part of the process.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that you guys got connected through this piece.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to rehearsing tomorrow. Right. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, of course. So you were actually early about the deadline. So
yeah.
How do you do it?
Honestly, I'm not sure, because most of the time when that happens, I don't expect it to. I'm actually a lot of the times expecting to have to push the deadline, and I'm always worried that I'm not going to make it. And then I think the panic does something to me, because then usually in the week before it's due, all of everything kind of comes together, and then I'm like, oh, I guess this is done now, I also, because I'm right now as a student and also as somebody who's kind of juggling, many projects, I try not to kind of labor over little details for every project I'm doing. There's certain projects where that is required, where multiple drafts are required, but things that kind of are on a fast timeline like this, I am very much, I'm intuitively driven, and so I'll kind of use my instincts to just give me that initial draft, and then I'll just kind of refine it, and then, kind of go in and play around with motivic things, make sure everything flows and has some kind of sense of unity to it, but yeah, it doesn't always happen like that. There have been deadlines that I've missed, so.
So when the composition is done, off your hands,
mm-hmm.
do you ever want to revise?
Yeah, it depends. I think most of the time, yes, but it has to be a combination of I really liked the piece. I think this piece has more, there's more to it, and there's more that can be done with it. Yeah, so it combined with really liking the piece, but feeling there's just something that it needs. If a piece is just kind of if I feel kind of about it, I just leave it. I'm not really gonna revise, and but yeah, I think most of the time that's the case where I'm gonna want to revise after the first performance.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, everybody's answer is different, so I just wondered what you think.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, thank you for your time. I think this is enough for me to... Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for interviewing me.
Yeah, of course.
This is a really exciting project to work on. So.
Yeah, thank you.